We begin a very busy show tonight with the new political wedge issue being wielded by Republicans as we inch toward the November elections. Gone are the quaint days of using issues like abortion, guns, and gay marriage as wedges to divide the populace. Those issues are no longer the cutting edge of GOP demagoguery. This summer's hot new fashion, the specter of the scary Muslims.
And one of the things I'm going to suggest today is a federal law which says no court anywhere in the United States under any circumstance is allowed to consider Sharia as a replacement for American law, period.
That was former Republican House Speaker Newt Gingrich sounding the alarm today on Islamic Sharia law invading America, warning that U.S. courts may soon choose to forego traditional American law in favor of Islamic law. Sure, this hasn't actually happened anywhere, but that didn't stop him from bravely taking a stand against it and being rewarded for his courage with applause. As campaign season unfolds this year, it is fascinating to observe Republican politicians and Republican candidates using Muslim baiting as a crude political wedge issue, picking bigoted fights over Islam to rally their base and appeal to voters' worst impulses. Nowhere has this strategy been more apparent than here in New York City, where the proposed construction of Islamic Center and Mosque 2 blocks away from Ground Zero has stirred up all sorts of fear-mongering from Republican politicians.
Yeah, I believe it is very offensive and it's wrong. I don't believe that legally it can be stopped, however, because of the First Amendment.
This is Carl Palladino. As governor, I will use the power of eminent domain to stop this mosque and make the site a war memorial instead of a monument to those who attacked our country.
The idea of a 13-story building set up by a group, many of whom, frankly, are very hostile to our civilization. And I'm talking now about the people who organized this, many of whom are apologists for Sharia, which is a form of law that I think we cannot allow in this country, period.
The issue of this Islamic Center and mosque has become so politically hyped by Republicans that earlier this week, Republican gubernatorial hopeful Rick Lazio challenged Democrat Andrew Cuomo to a debate solely on that issue. Who's for America and who's for the Muslims? And this whole fear the mosque thing isn't just on display in New York either. It's happening in California as well, where a group that appears to be Tea Party affiliated is planning to hold a protest tomorrow against a proposed mosque being built in the city of Temecula. Protesters are being encouraged to bring their dogs to that one because, according to the organizer, Muslims, quote, hate Jews, they hate Christians, they hate women, and they hate dogs. The strange thing about this anti-Islam thing gaining traction as a new political wedge issue is that it's actually gotten worse the farther we've gotten from 9/11. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, President Bush earned and deserved a lot of credit for not letting the events of that day indict Islam as a religion.
These acts of violence against innocents violate the fundamental tenets of the Islamic faith. And it's important for my fellow Americans to understand that. The face of terror is not the true faith of Islam. That's not what Islam is all about. Islam is peace.
Islam is peace. After 9/11, President Bush really led the effort on this sort of hearteningly measured approach to Islam, a reasonable approach towards Islam that is quickly vanishing from the modern-day Republican Party. It's a party that seems to be consumed with opposing Islam, casting aspersions against the intentions of Muslims, and standing up against these made-up threats like Sharia law somehow taking over America.
This is a preemptive strike to make sure that liberal judges don't take the bench in an effort to use their position to undermine those founding principles and to consider international law or Sharia law. This is a war for the survival of America. It's a cultural war. It's a social war. It's a war for the survival of our country. Frankly, it's the face of the enemy. It's the face of the enemy, and we need to call it what it is.
The war against Sharia law is, quote, a war for the survival of America. That's the type of rhetoric that's on display right now from Republican politicians across the country. And it's not just Oklahoma where Sharia law is apparently taking over. It's happening in nearby Tennessee as well.
You cross the line when they start trying to bring Sharia law here to the states in the United States. It's not good if that's what's going on. Now, you could even argue whether that being a Muslim is actually a religion or is it a nationality, way of life, or cult, whatever you want to call it.
That's right. Islam might be a cult, according to one of Tennessee's Republican gubernatorial candidates. The seeds of this fear the Muslim strategy were actually planted months ago. Remember back in October when 4 Republican members of Congress held a press conference in Washington to accuse the Islamic organization CARE of hatching a secret plot to place Muslim spies on Capitol Hill in the form of congressional interns?
About a year ago, I learned that CARE was trying to infiltrate the offices of members of Congress by placing interns in the offices.
Planting spies in key national security-related congressional offices.
It is unnerving, to say the least, that there would be members of groups catalyzed by CARE coming into congressional offices to try to change our public policy.
The crafty Muslim intern infiltrators who are trying to get into our courts and Capitol Hill. With November's elections fast approaching next month, a whole slew of Republican candidates for office in the state of Florida are scheduled to appear at a Tea Party rally in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. That rally is being headlined by this woman, Bridget Gabrielle. Ms. Gabrielle is billed as a leading expert on global Islamic terrorism. If her past speeches are any guide, here's what these Tea Partiers and Republican candidates can expect to hear next month. Quick programming note, before this clip, we of course make the distinction between Muslims and Arabs, but Ms. Gabrielle apparently does not.
The difference, my friends, between Israel and the Arabic world is a difference between civilization and barbarism. It's a difference between goodness and evil. And this is what we're witnessing in the Arabic world. They have no soul. They are dead set on killing and destruction.
They have no soul. They're dead set on killing and destruction. As campaign season continues to ramp up across the country, this seems to be the Republican Party's new identity wedge political gamble. This is what they seem to be staking their claim on right now, the inherent danger posed by Muslims inside this country. Distorted and disgusting attempt to stoke the worst kind of tribalist impulses among voters. In other words, not a new playbook, just a new chapter. Joining us now is Randa Hudome. She was the Associate Deputy Secretary of Energy in the Bush administration, and now she's a president of a consulting firm in Washington, which we should note does lobbying work on behalf of domestic and international clients. Ms. Hudome, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Sure. Good to see you, Chris.
I want to get to the larger issues that we sort of introed in that segment there, but first I just want to get your reaction to that Gingrich soundbite in the speech today. What did you make of that, him saying we should pass a law against the non-existent threat of the imposition of Sharia?
Well, I'm not sure as far as the speech goes because I was not there. And as we've all learned these past few weeks, we don't want to take comments out of context. That being said, you know, Speaker Gingrich, who was a Speaker of the House in 1994 and a member of Congress, very well knows that we have the protection of the First Amendment here in the United States. It's the First Amendment for a reason. And what it does is protect anybody from the exercise of free religion, but it also protects the Congress from passing any law that prohibits that exercise of free religion or establishes any religion. So we already have the protections of the First Amendment here in the United States, and I'm not sure what Newt Gingrich was speaking about there. But certainly, as you mentioned, Chris, it's the silly season, and I can only surmise that Newt Gingrich is running for president in 2012.
Well, but that's an interesting sort of indication, right? I mean, if it is a silly season, if this is being done to gin up political interest, what does that say about what Republicans are willing to say or the people they're willing to use as sort of straw man enemies in campaign season?
Well, Chris, you had an interesting introduction there, but I would urge you to do a little bit more digging on those politicians who are speaking out against Muslim or anti-Islamic rhetoric. You forgot in your Florida piece to mention Jeff Green, the Democratic Senate candidate who's running for the United States Senate in Florida, and who himself called the Quran, having very, crazy language in the Quran and said some things about Islam that were not very enlightening. So, Chris, this rhetoric is on both the Democrat and Republican side. This is not just a Republican issue.
That is,
what I can tell you is, if you give me 24 hours, I will dig up every negative statement of every Democratic senator and congressman against Islam and Muslims in America. And it won't be that hard.
I would invite you to do that, and I guarantee you we will post it on the blog because I really don't think you'll be able to come up with it. I mean, the fact of the matter is, right now, if you look at this Ground Zero, and let's talk about the Ground Zero Islamic Center. I mean,
sure, absolutely.
that is these, one after another, Republican candidates, in fact, the Republican gubernatorial candidates are trying to kind of out-Islamic center each other between Rick Lazio and his opponent, whose name's escaping me at the moment. But what do you make of that? Why is that a big issue for these Republican candidates?
Okay, well, let's first of all talk about the Ground Zero Mosque and the actual vote that counts, and those members of the New York Council who had to vote on this. The Ground Zero Mosque, and by the way, that's sort of a misnomer. It's not a mosque. It's actually a community center that includes a mosque, restaurants, a cultural center, an auditorium. So what it is a community center which exists all over the United States in many states. But that vote that took place in the New York City Council was actually overwhelmingly voted in favor of it, and indeed, many of those members that voted on the city council, take a look at those votes, were indeed Republicans and Democrats and independents and everything there. Now, let's go to what you're talking about here, which is people running for office and using this as a wedge issue. There's no question, Chris, that after 9/11, Islam took a great deal of beating